Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to you for being here to answer our questions. Mr. Polite, I'd like to start with you, if that's okay.
Yes, Senator.
In your written testimony, you referenced the, quote, mounting and persistent threats to the safety of election officials and workers across the country. And you described this, I believe, as the justification for the creation for the Election Threats Task Force just over a year ago. You also explained that the vast majority of the complaints are not crimes because of what you described as the robust protections of the First Amendment. This is, in fact, the way our system operates. There are things that people say that people may or may not like, but they are usually protected if they're just speaking words, and those words themselves don't amount to threats or other criminal conduct. They may be First Amendment, protected by the First Amendment. You also have described the fact that it appears from your briefing that since the inception of the task force, you've gotten about 1,000 complaints. Is that right?
That's correct, Senator.
1,000 complaints, and as I understand it was just over 100 of those 1,000, so about 1 in 10 of those that were deemed worthy of investigation. Is that also correct?
That's correct, Senator.
And of those 100 out of 1,000 that have been investigated, how many of those have been prosecuted by your office?
To date, Senator, we have prosecuted 5 defendants.
Five defendants. Of those 5 defendants, one, as I understand it, was a prosecution that had begun previously or outside the scope of the task force. Is that also accurate?
I believe you may be referring to the Michigan charge, which was the first one charged by the Department of Justice. That's correct.
So you've got 5 prosecuted out of 1,000 complaints and 100 investigated. What efforts are being made to ensure that your investigations aren't having an undue effect on the chilling of First Amendment protected activity?
Thank you, Senator. And again, we certainly embrace the scope of our First Amendment protections in the political speech, as you were outlining earlier. It's part of the reason why the work of the task force has been so significant. It has involved reviewing each and every one of those communications to see if it actually satisfied the very high bar that's set by our courts for those constitutional parameters.
Glad to hear you're doing that. It makes a lot of sense. Of those prosecutions, the 5 that you mentioned, how many of those involved actual physical acts of violence where contact was made as opposed to threatening language?
Of those 5, Senator, all involved serious threats of unlawful violence.
Was there one that had involved physical contact and somebody had actually used force, or all 5 of them threats of physical violence?
All threats, Senator.
Of those prosecutions, how many of them could have been brought under state law? I mean, I assume from those that I read through the briefings of each of those as you submitted in your written testimony. It appears to me each one of those probably involved multiple violations of law. Some of them involved multiple violations of federal law. I would imagine each of them probably would have amounted to a violation of state law. Is that fair to say?
It's quite possible, Senator. That's not uncommon, that there's oftentimes conduct that could be prosecuted in multiple jurisdictions, federal or state.
Right. So in going through this, it just makes me wonder what exactly amounts to the mounting and persistent threats that the department felt compelled to create a task force specifically for this, where in a year you've gotten 1,000 complaints, 100 worthy of investigation, 5 worthy of prosecutions. When especially it appeared to me on the face of it, each of those cases, if they wouldn't also have been things that could have and would have been prosecuted under state law in the absence of federal action, they probably are the sorts of things that would have been prosecuted in the normal course of business at the federal level in appropriate cases. And so it makes me wonder whether the task force is necessary or necessary relative to other things. The concern here is not that they're doing this task force. The concern is whether that task force could take away other priorities for other crimes. Has the Department of Justice created a task force, for example, on unprovoked attacks on police officers?
Again, Senator, I think the fact that the Election Threats Task Force exists, part of its fundamental role is coordination with state and local law enforcement officials. A number of those cases have also been charged by state jurisdictions as well.
I understand. I do worry about that. I mean, we had 25 unprovoked attacks on law enforcement officers in 2021, up from just 2 the year before. 133 ambush attacks on police were attacked relative to the previous year, in which 60 officers were shot in these attacks. As far as federal crimes against members of the judiciary, under Section 1507 of Title 18 of the U.S. Code, federal law prohibits picketing or parading outside of a court or a judge's residence, quote, with the intent of interfering with, obstructing, or impeding the administration of justice, or with the intent of influencing any judge, juror, witness, or court officer. So, protesters outside the justices' homes, since the May 2nd leak of the draft opinion in the Dobbs case, have not been shy about their intent to intimidate and otherwise influence Supreme Court justices, particularly those listed, those believed to be likely to join the draft majority opinion that was leaked. To my knowledge, not a single charge has been brought under Section 1507. You mentioned in your testimony United States versus Caitlin Jones, which I agree is a disturbing case that needed to be prosecuted. Are you aware of similarly disgusting and also much more persistent attacks on Justice Kavanaugh's wife and children? And what about similar threats against Justice Barrett and her children? And all this to say nothing of the fact that we had an assassination attempt on Justice Kavanaugh's life. We shouldn't have to have an assassination attempt to understand the gravity of these threats against members of the judiciary. But meanwhile, you've got groups like Ruth Sent Us and Jane's Revenge who are openly publishing the addresses of these justices. In some cases, apparently distributing information about their children, where they go to school, resulting in threats and attacks on them. My point here is that I hope within the department you're being fair. I would ask within the department that you're looking out for how many of those cases are being investigated and prosecuted. And if you've got a task force for this conduct, task force receiving 1,000 complaints, 100 investigations resulting in a total of 5 prosecutions, I would hope that you would have a few to look at violations of 18 U.S.C. Section 1507. Thank you.
Senator, if I may respond very quickly. Senator, the prioritization of threats against anyone, particularly those who are in public service, is absolutely vital for us. What I can tell you is that our Attorney General has announced additional resources from our Marshal Service in order to protect our Supreme Court justices. In addition, very recently, our U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Maryland has charged a defendant related to unlawful conduct that was being conducted in front of the home of one of those Supreme Court justices. So we don't operate purely through task forces in terms of the priorities of our division or our department.
Senator Ossoff.